Well, we continue our series looking at some of the stories, some of the stories that sometimes aren't picked up in the Bible. So different characters that we're looking at. And today I'm going to talk to you about Shiprah and Puah. Shiprah and Puah. Now, I'm not brilliant with names, right? I was doing some training this week, and in my training course there were a number of people who had Eastern European names. And so at the start, you kind of do that, what's your name, introduce yourself. And they always do their names, and I'm there thinking, I've already forgotten them. This is, it's horrible. And they're in the room and you're thinking, this is embarrassing. I can't keep all day saying, and what do you think? I'm going to have to use the name. So I kind of, suddenly at the moment, I've got to do a register. So I got them all to write out their names in the register. I thought, I've got it. And then I looked at this and I think, I've no idea how to pronounce this. So I found an app on my phone. And in the break, I sat there with their names printing it in and said, how do you say this? It's a Romanian. So how do you say this one? And it would come on and say, Limana. So I would say, when she come in and say, hello, Limana. And she goes, what? Limana? No, it's not Limana, it's Lina. Oh, Lina! No, don't you do the it's just, anyway. So when you come to the names like Shiprah and Puah, you may notice throughout this talk that the names change sometimes. Okay, so there will be moments I might get their names slightly wrong. The first time I became really aware of them and their names was actually at a point where I was going around Schindler's factory. It was in Krakow in Poland. And Schindler was a guy who rescued many Jewish people during the war. He set up his factory and did incredible things, rescuing the lives of so many people. And going around his factory was incredibly moving. It was, as you're walking around, it's just the overwhelming sense of what this man had done, the danger he'd taken, actually how God can use even the ungodly to do his work. But you're going around, and then as you're coming through, there's a tunnel at the end. And some of the Jews who had been rescued by him had left notes. And one of the big ones was this. As you walked out, it said, thank you for being a Shiprah and Puah. Thank you for being a Shiprah and Puah. And so I kind of thought, well, what's that? So I went looking. And of course, you then find them right at the start of Exodus. So often we look at the book of Exodus and say, right, let's get into Moses. But right at the start, you're introduced to these two incredible women who were used powerfully by God. In Exodus 1, let me read you this from verse 6. Then Joseph died, and all his brothers and all the generation. But the people of Israel were fruitful and increased greatly. They multiplied and grew exceedingly strong. So the land was filled with them. Now there arose a new king over Egypt, who did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, behold, the people of Israel are too many and too mighty for us. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply. And if war breaks out, they'll join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land. Therefore, they set taskmasters over them to afflict them with heavy burdens. They built for Pharaoh stores, cities in Pithom, in Ramesses. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied, the more they spread abroad. And the Egyptians were in dread of the people of Israel. So they ruthlessly made the people of Israel work as slaves and made their lives bitter and hard service in mortar and brick and all kinds of work in the field. In all their work, they ruthlessly made them work as slaves. Then the king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was Shiprah and one was Puah, when you serve as midwives to the Hebrew women and see them on the birth stool, if it is a son, you shall kill him. But if it's a daughter, you can let them live. But the midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded, but let the male children live. So the king of Egypt called the midwives and said to them, why have you done this? And let the male children live. So the king of Egypt called the midwives and said to them, why have you done this? I just said that. But just to let you know that he did do that. The midwife said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women, for they are vigorous and give birth before the midwife comes to them. So God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and grew very strong. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families. It's an incredible story right there at the start. And it starts with fear. It's interesting. I don't know if you saw the Queen's funeral. The bit I found most moving was when they took the crown off. Right at the end, they took the crown and the big ball thing and the little stick thing, the orb. Or the orb. The orb. They took the crown and the orb and the sceptre, whatever. And they took them off and gave them back to God. And I found that really moving, that because they found, the Queen always believed this was from God, and because it was from God, she served because she bowed the knee to him. And that was why she would never abdicate, because this was given by God. The only way this is given back is when I go. And I found that so powerful in all of this. But I also loved the Archbishop of Canterbury's sermon. This moment at which we preach the gospel to millions and millions and millions. But the bit that I found right at the start is this. The people loved the Queen because she was a servant. And because she served, the people will remember her and love her. Unlike other leaders, he said, who want power and their own sort of interests and their own, what was it? Big stuff. So all their own, more interested in their own legacy, they will be forgotten. Well, let me introduce you to a king who is more interested in his legacy, more interested in keeping his family line going, more interested in the nation than the people. And all I'd say is this: you have no idea what his name is. The pharaohs built massive pyramids, they built massive things to remind everyone, look at who I am, look at this, look at what I've done, look what I've done. We have no idea who this pharaoh is, no idea who this king is. He is just a fearful king. A king who was looking at the Israelites and was fearful. Look how many there are. Look how awful they are. And in fact, starts getting completely unreasonable. Do you notice how fear becomes ridiculous? So suddenly it's, look, there's so many of them, they're going to join our enemies. Why? There's no hint that the Israelites are thinking, do you know what, let's join an enemy. There's no hint of it. They're doing okay. But he's terrified. And because of fear, he says, let's work them. But the more they're worked, the stronger they get. The more they are. And then he gets really fearful. And then he gets this ridiculous plot. He decides, I'm going to use the Hebrew midwives to kill the Hebrews. It's nonsensical. Can I go so far as to say, it's like being mighty Russia and looking at Ukraine and saying, they're going to have nuclear bombs and they're going to destroy us. Let's invade it. It's nonsensical. It's nonsensical to suddenly say, we're going to make them all want to be Russian. Oh yeah, that's worked. It's nonsensical. Exactly the same situation. But there's another lineage going on at this time. And it starts with Joseph has died and all his brothers. See, there is another line here. This isn't just about the king and his pharaoh and his... It's actually about God's line. That goes all the way back to Abraham. The promise to Abraham, from you will come one, who your sons and daughters will be more expansive than all the stars in the sky. From you will come one who will change everything. Actually, the promise there is it will happen. And at this moment in time, the Pharaoh is trying to break that line. The Pharaoh said, I'm going to destroy the lion, I'm going to get in there, I'm going to destroy it. And God says, you don't mess with this one. From this line comes one who will have all authority. From this line will come one who will rescue all of humanity. You don't mess with this line. And in the midst of it are two midwives, seemingly totally insignificant. Midwives were actually the untouchables, strangely. They were the lowest of the low. They were the ones who were looked down upon. They were the ones who couldn't have children. They were the ones who were kind of right down at the bottom of the society. And he went to them and said, you could do this for me. And they went away and basically said, no. Why? Because we fear God more than man. We fear God more than man. And when I talk fear here, I'm not talking, oh, I'm talking reverence and awe. We are God's people. I'm going to live for him. I'm not going to do the work of this king. I'm going to do the work of God. I'm not going to mess with God's people. I'm going to live for God. And so you had this amazing moment where they were told by the king, fear me! And they go, do you know what? Actually, we'd rather fear him. Rather fear the one we worship. I'd rather serve him than you. On top of this, have you ever noticed in the Garden of Eden, when suddenly Satan is told, from the seed of woman will come one who will crush you. Ever after that, Satan is trying to destroy babies. Have you noticed? And here it is again. And then when Jesus is born, what happens? You've got the king of the time, kill the babies under 2. Time and time again, trying to destroy this line. As if God is so weak it could be destroyed. But here's these 2 women. And time is gone. All I want to say is this. We have an unknown king and 2 known midwives. And I find that incredibly moving. A king with all his power, all his authority, all his temples, and all his big pyramids, and all his stuff, and say, look at me, look at me, look at me. And all we know is there was a king, and there was Shiprah and Puah. And Shiprah and Puah mean, literally, beautiful and splendid. I think that's so beautiful and splendid. The name of these midwives are Beautiful and Splendid. And he goes to Beautiful and Splendid and says, do this horrible deed. And they say, no, we're beautiful and we're splendid. And we're going to be known in the Word of God as beautiful and splendid, and you'll just be a king. Unknown king. We will be beautiful and splendid. We will end up, no, they're not saying this, but this is what happens. We will end up in Schindler's factory on the wall as people who represent being saviours. They saved people. Now, you could also say, did they lie? We don't know. When they said, why aren't you killing them? I said, well, you know, Jewish women are much faster in childbirth than the Egyptian ones, and they're just popping out. You know, let me get there. Whoa, there's another one alive. Oh dear, there we go. Oh, there we are. Well, it might be some element of truth in it, but what we do know is they said, no, we are not going to do this horrible deed that you've asked us to do. We're going to serve our God. We're going to do that which God has called us to do. We're going to go for it. We're going to ignore these stupid demands. We're going to serve God. And then we read that God blesses them. I love this. By being faithful to God, you allow God to bless you. By doing that which God has asked you to do, you are now being blessed by God. You could do what man tells you to do. And if they had done it, I'm sure the king would have said, whoa, you've done great. You're going to have all this money. You're going to have this wealth. You're going to be protected. But no. They did what God told them. As a result, they end up married with a family. Two things they couldn't do. And on top of that, we know their names. As people of faith, like Shiprah and Puah, we are called to change the story, to reframe the narrative, to tell a different story. We are called to do away with the story of death and destruction. We're called to tell the powerful story of God's love. We're called to pay attention, to speak up for those who are not allowed to speak. We're called to change the course of history so that many may know the grace and the love of God. We are called to be open to where the Spirit of God is moving, and among us, that we can truly become a movement that brings healing to a fragmented world. That's our call. We're called to be Shiprahs and Puahs to our society. We're called to be people who fear God and not man. And the biggest challenge is this: how often do we fear man? How often do we do what the world tells us to do rather than what God tells us to do? If we want to build a church where He is glorified, if we want to build a church where people come and meet with a living God, if we want to build a church that truly impacts our communities and our society, if we want to build churches that plant churches and flourish, we've got to be people who say, I'm going to put God first. God first in everything. I'm going to live for Him. I'm going to cherish Him. I'm going to be sold out for Him. I'm not going to fear what the world says. I'm going to fear God and love Him above all others. So let's stand as we come to an end. I'm just going to do one of the craziest appeals I think I've ever done. The craziest one I ever did was on timidity. And I found myself saying the lines, if you're timid, just come forward, we want to pray for you. Which I thought was slightly outrageous. But this one's this: if you know you really battle with the fear of man, I'm going to ask you actually to come forward and say, I want to fear God first and foremost. I want to be sold out for Him. If you find yourself wanting to fit in sometimes with the way the crowd's going, rather than stand out and say, no, I want to do what Jesus has told me to do, I'm going to ask you to come forward. We're going to do a song, and if you'd like to come forward, we're going to come forward, we're going to pray for you and pray for God's strength and God's boldness. I just want to say, this is an appeal I'm also responding to, right? I just don't have to walk to the front, but I just want to say there are moments where you find yourself challenged. When I was doing this training this week, at the end, I had this guy come up to me, and he said, there's something different about you. What is it? So there's something about you in the way you've been with us. What is it that's different? And everything in you wants to say, oh yeah, I'm just a friendly guy. And I said, actually, it's because I'm a Christian. And my main job, I said, is actually I serve churches. I work with churches. That's what I do. He says, yeah, it shows. I go, oh, yes, that's nice. It's always good to have a dyslexic teach you how to take notes. But it's kind of like, but actually, it was that moment. Let's not be fearful. So let's just lift your hands. Who's going to pray? Father, I thank you for that amazing story right there at the start of Exodus. That incredible story before we go on to Moses and you taking your people out of that land. Right in the heart of it, you've got two midwives who, because of their bold actions, saved many lives. And Lord, I want to pray for us here, Lord, that you'll help us be men and women who fear our God above the world. We will stand out for what we believe to be true, and we will live for what we believe to be true, even if it puts us in danger of falling out with maybe some of the philosophies of the world today. But Lord, I pray, give us strength to be like Shiprah and Puah and say, no, we will not fear the world, we will fear God and live for Him and Him alone. Bless us, Lord, please, in your incredible name. Amen.